important successes. And that's how you look at a president. But I think the major thing that he did in his presidency was to save the world from nuclear war. I mean, when the Cuban Missile Crisis, and now people understand how close we were to nuclear war and how President Kennedy solved that problem, I think that's something that is high on the list of legacy of President Kennedy.
Kennedy was the Lochinvar, the Galahad. He was the, to most people who live now don't realize the tremendous impact this good-looking, youthful person. He'd only been president, I think, for 2 years or something of that kind.
We were always surrounded by very elderly statesmen who seemed to be too old to be alive, let alone running countries. But he was a man that even us fellows who were younger than him could see was a sort of young buck with all the kind of power and confidence of the most important nation in the world, and everything seemed to rest on his shoulders, and we had tremendous hopes for him.
Kennedy in some ways was seen as a symbol, not just of a new America, but of a new world. He was a young man, he was good-looking, a sort of mixture of Robert Redford and Steve McQueen, and I think people felt when he took over that the world had a new chance, and America had a sort of leader which would enable it to lead us forward into a better future rather than simply keep things under control.
Dennis Healey, a seasoned politician even then, was not immune to the widespread sense of loss.
The thing I remember very well indeed was sitting at home in Highgate in London and just hearing this terrible news on the radio, and I burst into tears.
I was horrified because I knew John F. Kennedy and thought very well of him. And it seemed to me, as it seemed to many people, that a light had gone out in the world.
As a political correspondent in America, Keith Kyle had got to know Kennedy before he became president.
I was anxious to know what sort of impression he would make. And he asked me out to lunch and drove me into the countryside in his car. It was a most alarming journey, because Kennedy engages one in conversation very intensely. He has an extraordinary ability to extract from you anything that is worth knowing about a subject in a relatively short compass of time. He'd make a splendid television interviewer. And throughout this drive, he was looking at me full in the face, never once putting his eyes on the road, and he drove very fast.
In 1960, when I first arrived in Dallas, or hadn't been there very long, of course there was the election, and they had the parades on consecutive days, and that car came to a complete standstill, so I ran out and shook hands with him and said something like, "Good luck, Mr. Kennedy." And he said, and it does sound so implausible, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you, because people think, oh, come on, you know. But he said something like, "You're from England, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, you know, what are you doing here?" And so I said, "Well, I just came over, you know, for a few months to learn about the cotton industry." And so we had a bit of a chat, and of course you don't really know. I didn't know whether it was like a couple of minutes or 30 seconds or whatever. For a politician, I'd have thought this was probably unique. I mean, he talked about me rather than about himself, you know, because he seemed to be genuinely interested in what I was doing for a short period of time. So, obviously, after that, I wanted him to win the election, so I could say, well, that's my mate John, you know, he's the President of the United States now.
He's so fine, wish he were mine.
Kennedy brought glamour to the political stage, a place where people were not accustomed to finding it. And television had not previously found, on either side of the Atlantic, so telegenic a politician. As Lime Grove crumbles, Sir Paul Fox, who once ran BBC Current Affairs here, recalls the presidential magic.
He had a charmed relationship with the media. I mean, there's no question of that. The media adored him because he knew how to deal with the media. He attracted the media, he attracted media people, and he was an impressive figure on television. I always remember he was over here on a visit to see Prime Minister Macmillan. Macmillan, after all, was a kinsman. He always called him Uncle Harold. I remember he was here, and it was the night of a panorama program. And I asked Ludo Kennedy to go and interview him. And Ludo did a most marvelous doorstepping job on President Kennedy.
I rushed towards him, and I saw the Secret Service people, so I thought, I wondered if they were reaching for a gun or something, because I just came out of the blue like that.
It wouldn't have been possible that any previous president, or presidents afterwards, could have been successfully doorstepped. And what's more, President Kennedy recognized Ludo and said, "Oh, I've just read your book about Notting Hill Gate."
Well, that was astonishing, you see. He didn't know I was coming. I mean, you can brief a president. You would say, oh, so-and-so's coming along, ask him, say that you know about this. He didn't know I was coming at all. And that was, of course, was very impressive.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Remember, the television at that time was not the powerful force it is today. But I did something after President Kennedy was elected that changed things in the direction of television by convincing him that he should have live television press conferences, something that had never happened with any president before.
Their duty, and then they're called back. And
there was a real charisma about him. He had a sense of humor. We now know that this image of him as being very young and fit was quite phony. He was actually extremely seriously ill in several ways. But he used to stand up and take questions at these press conferences. It was a performance. He was stylish. He was funny.
how is your aching back? Well, it depends on the weather, political and otherwise.
The reporters who made the Kennedy reputation were also Harvard men and Yale men, and they got on like a house on fire with the Kennedy people, and they were very uncritical, actually. To be fair, I think a lot of these people now realize that they were seduced and sort of had by the excitement and the charm of the Kennedy coterie, but there was an enormous amount of uncritical journalism.
There are many Americans who believe that in our manner of questioning or seeking your attention, that we're subjecting you to some abuse or a lack of respect.
Well, you're subjecting me to some abuse, but not to any lack of respect, I don't think.
Thank you, Mr. President.
When the Black Watch played on the White House lawn on November the 13th, JFK had 9 days to live.
Well, it was a historic occasion for my regiment. I think the last time that we had been in the White House was when we burnt it down in 1812. It's a matter of interest, or so my pipe major told me. We thought it'd be a nice gesture on behalf of the regiment if we could make a presentation to the president. So I made a very short speech in front of him before the performance of the bands. And we gave him one of our big regimental dirks with the regimental motto inscribed on it, which in the circumstances, with hindsight, of course, it's certainly ironic.
I want to thank Major for this presentation of a dirk of the Black Watch. The Major just said that the motto of the Black Watch is, nobody wounds us with impunity. I think that's a very good motto for some of the rest of us. Thank you.
Fort Worth, Texas, on the last morning of Jack Kennedy's life. About him, as ever, the aura that made people talk of a new world Camelot, the charm and the wit.
2 years ago, I said that, introduced myself in Paris by saying that I was the man who had accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris. I'm getting somewhat that same sensation as I travel around Texas. Nobody wonders what Lyndon and I wear.
And so to Dallas, and the shots that were to kill a president and stun the world.
Glad to be here in Jim Wright City. About 35...
Yourself, takes longer. That's because she looks better than we do.
Washington, on the night of November the 22nd.